2024 has been a pretty amazing year for new movies, but there's been some really bad ones as well. And honestly, this was super difficult to even pick the top 10 worst because of just how many really bad films there were this year. But this is what I've narrowed down to be my top 10 worst films of 2024. At number 10 is Madam Web. I know it's easy to rag on this and call it like the worst film of the year of all time. I don't think it's quite that bad, but this thing is a complete train wreck. My biggest issue with it is that it's barely even a superhero movie. I've said this before. All that happens is she looks into the future for like 5 seconds throughout the film, and at the very end, she looks into the future and sees the other Spider-Woman. We don't even get the Spider-Woman in this film, which is honestly criminal. If you're gonna make a Spider-Man movie without Spider-Man, at least give us the Spider-Woman in the film. It would be something to hold on to. But no, they don't do that. We get one of the worst comic book villains I've seen in a very long time. The only somewhat pro for this movie is that visually, I do think it actually looks pretty decent, but again, every time a character opens their mouth, you just cringe again. At number 9, I have Red One. I'm so glad there's a lot of people out there that really enjoy this film, and I wish I could enjoy it. I go into every movie hoping I like it, but I just really did not enjoy a single second of this movie outside of J.K. Simmons being Santa Claus, and the entire plot of the film revolves around him being kidnapped, so he's really not even in the film. I just felt like this was so incredibly generic. I've seen The Rock in like the same movie 10 times before, making the same exact jokes. Chris Evans is absolutely sleepwalking through this. I need him to get in some better movies ASAP because he is genuinely a great actor. But after Captain America and Knives Out, he is just not even trying anymore. Some of the practical effects I do think are cool, but otherwise a lot of the green screen stuff looks pretty terrible. At number 8, I have Mufasa the Lion King. Again, if you enjoyed this, I'm happy for you. I wish I did, but I did not care about a single thing happening in this movie. And this is just, again, incredibly boring. It's taking the concept of a Mufasa and Scar origin, which nobody really asked for, but at least sounded like it could have been cool on its own, and somehow just gave us the most bland story imaginable. I thought a lot of the songs were really forgettable too. Like, I have not thought about one of them ever since I left the theater, and that's such a staple of the first Lion King movie is the amazing music. And of course, this film's not helped out by being in the terrible live action, quote unquote, CGI style. I despise this so much. The film would still be bad if it was in the original 2D animation style because the story is just bad in general in my opinion, but it would at least have a little bit more charm. This is just so lifeless. Even if it does look okay visually, I don't care about it. Up until this point, I can see anybody liking the other movies I went over on the list, even though they weren't personally for me, but this is where things start really falling off a cliff at number 7 with Netflix's original movie Time Cut. If you don't know, this is their new like horror serial killer slasher film that came out right at Halloween time, and it is actually one of the goofiest things I've ever seen in my life. It feels like a Disney Channel original movie. Some of the worst acting I've ever seen in my life. Like this Madison chick from Outer Banks is in it, and she is just terrible in every scene. It has one of the most predictable and stupidest plot twists I've ever seen in my life. There's no logic anywhere in this movie. A complete disaster. I cannot believe this is a real thing that exists. Number 6 is Despicable Me 4. This thing is just cash grab the movie. You can literally tell they have no idea what to do with these characters anymore. Because like I like some of the Despicable Me movies. Obviously they're for people way younger than me, but they actually were kind of charming and funny. This one is not funny. There's literally no point to the story. They go on a side quest for like 40 minutes in the middle of it just to kill time. I'm convinced this is just a huge psyop that only exists just to sell toys of the Minions and the Mega Minions. There's no other reason this thing exists. At number 5 is the Crow remake. I have actually never seen the original Crow until this year, and I checked it out and I thought it was just perfectly fine, nothing incredible and nothing that needed to be remade for sure, but it wasn't a bad movie. This completely loses pretty much anything that made that first one good, and it is just so unbelievably hard to sit through. Boring, dull, lifeless. This thing honestly should have just never been made. I feel bad for Bill Skarsgård, but he had a good year too with Nosferatu, which, spoiler alert, might be in the next video I make of the best of the year. At number 4 is Borderlands. I honestly was kind of stupid. I knew this movie wasn't going to be good in any way, shape, or form, but I saw the trailers. I was like, whatever, I'll give it a shot. I like the Borderlands game. Maybe it can at least be decent with this all-star cast, even though it doesn't seem like they should ever be in a movie together. Yeah, I was wrong. This thing is an absolute disaster. And yeah, the cast, they did not blend together in this movie. Like I said, all these actors on their own are very good. No chemistry whatsoever. All the jokes in this movie are just so dull and flat. But I actually think the biggest crime that this movie commits is that it takes Borderlands, a game that has a very distinct visual style and tone to it, whether you like it or not. It is very distinct. and it really captures none of that. Like, they take the characters, but they don't even feel like the same characters from the game half the time. They could have simply just done some cool makeup or effects to at least give them that like 3D spray painted style from the games, but no, we don't do that either. It feels like they literally just slapped the Borderlands name on some generic action movie, and this thing was just an absolute dud. I'm so glad it lost so much money because we cannot be supporting these things. Now, as I mentioned, this has been a really bad year and there's been some really bad films, so it was kind of hard to narrow down a top 10, so I kind of want to rapid fire through a few honorable mentions. So we'll get a few out of the way with some Netflix originals. The first one at the top left here is Trigger Warning and then Lift. You know what you're going to get when you watch a Netflix original action movie. They attach some big star like Jessica Alba or Kevin Hart, and they cannot carry these terrible films. They're so unbelievably generic and dull. Then on the bottom left here, we have Argyle, kind of not generic and dull, but it's trying so unbelievably hard to be super funny, super witty, and give you twists and turns every 2 seconds, and it's just simply way too much. Overbearing, and almost none of the humor is working for me. It's just super goofy. Right hand side, we have Joker Folie à Deux. We all know how this movie was a complete disaster. It's a spit in the face to the fans of the first movie. They made it a musical for some reason, but are afraid to commit to the idea of being a musical, so it ends up just feeling weird and choppy. The last hour of this film is completely tedious, and the ending is one of the worst of the entire year. Then we have Garfield. This movie, again, a super cash grab of a film. They only made it pretty much, I'm pretty sure, to sell Garfield toys, just like Despicable Me. The story really feels so generic and not tailored to Garfield at all. I'm pretty sure this is a script that's just been sitting around in Hollywood for like 10 years, and some studio that had the rights to the character of Garfield just slapped him over it because it just does not fit at all. The humor is really weird. It's like trying to appeal to the adults in the audience half the time, and it ends up making this movie funny for absolutely nobody. And then the Mean Girls musical. I like the first Mean Girls movie. It's a classic. Did we need this? No, it's worse than the first in every single way imaginable. Number 3 is Rebel Moon Part 2. I'm not the biggest fan of Zack Snyder. You guys probably know that from my opinions on like Man of Steel and his other DC films, but I do think he's done some good things in his career, and I was hoping this could be like an epic Zack Snyder take on Star Wars, because that's what it is. But no, this is the most forgettable cast of characters I've seen in a movie in a very long time. I literally couldn't tell you one of their names, even the second after I watched the film. Somehow, this being a part 2, it also feels slower and more like buildup of part 1, and honestly rehashes a lot of the same points, and of course the god-awful Snyder's slow-mo just really takes you out of it. Number 2, and welcome Netflix back to the list with back-to-back entries with Atlas. This is a Jennifer Lopez like anti-AI movie that's kind of pro-AI at the same time. It's her bonding with this like Titanfall robot of a thing. And this thing is terrible because, I'm sorry, Jennifer Lopez cannot act, and it is so apparent throughout this entire runtime. Ironically enough, for being a movie that's kind of anti-AI, like I said, it ends up kind of circling around on its own point and accidentally being pro-AI. It actually feels like it was written by ChatGPT, a movie that's so forgettable. I hope nobody watches this year, because if not, you'll never have to go back and visit it again. But if you've ever watched a video on my channel, you probably knew this was coming at number 1, Megamind versus the Doom Syndicate. I've talked at length about why I despise this movie. Ultimately, it's just a soulless studio production that doesn't bring back anybody from the original cast. They make the animation look worse because they didn't give this as much as a budget, and they just dumped it on streaming to try to get as much quick dollars as possible off of a beloved movie in Megamind, instead of giving us a true sequel, which could have been incredible. Voice acting's terrible. The Doom Syndicate are absolutely terrible characters. This thing is a complete abomination on every level. Let me know what your worst movies of the year are in the comments below, and I'd really appreciate a follow on Letterboxd. It's just at Vets Movies. I'm trying to grow that over there. I'd really appreciate it. And make sure to click below to watch another video on the channel.